Hello, how are you? This is the Stinger, Mike Glen. Today we are here to celebrate the perfect player in NBA. There's only one perfect player in NBA history. Everyone else is merely human. That perfect player is Oscar, the Big O Robertson. How did I get so intrigued with Oscar Robertson? I remember when I was a young fella growing up, my dad, Coach Charles Glenn, who's coach at Georgia School for the Deaf, told me Oscar Robertson was the best all-around player in the NBA. I was very intrigued by that. Who is this great Oscar Robertson? And my mom, Mrs. Annie Glenn, who was a teacher at public schools, taught me in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. She went and got a book for me called How to Play Better Basketball by Oscar Robertson. So I got that book and I read it from cover to cover. Matter of fact, I have a copy of his book, How to Play Better Basketball. Let me get this book and show it to you. So in this book, Oscar Robertson was teaching us how to play basketball, how to do that crossover dribble, which was the best in the NBA, and most importantly, how to shoot the basketball. So I studied this day and night, how to crossover, how to shoot the basketball, and I'll just show you one thing I learned. Oscar said that you had to line your elbow up with your nose in the basket, and your shot had to look like that. Oscar was strong, and he could do it even facing the basket like this. I had to turn a little bit, but it didn't make any difference. I learned how to shoot from Oscar Robertson. I would later learn there were many things about Oscar Robertson that makes him a very historic player. Not only the perfect basketball player, but also a historic person in America. Let me share a few of those things with you. Relax and enjoy the Oscar Robertson story. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Okay, let me tell you what I learned first of all. Oscar Robertson grew up in for the first part of his life, early part of his life, Central Tennessee. And his great-grandfather lived to 116 years old. His name was Marshall Collier. But they moved. They were part of a great migration where many blacks left the South. Now, Carter G. Woodson, father of black history, wrote a book in 1918. This is the book that Carter G. Woodson wrote. It was called A Century of Negro Migration. Carter G. Woodson knew that migration would continue after 1918. As a matter of fact, Oscar Robertson and his family were part of that migration. He went to Indianapolis. Many blacks went to New York, Detroit, Chicago, and other places in the North. Indianapolis was called the most southern city in the North. When he got there, he found out many things, some of them troubling to him. He found out that Indiana was a state that was the most popular state for Ku Klux Klan involvement. Now, there was one particular guy there named David Stevenson. David Stevenson was the grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in Indiana. He got the population to really, really grow. He even said, "I am the law." And a lot of people treated them that way. About 1/3 of the white males in Indiana were a part of the Ku Klux Klan. Let me show you a quote that David Stevenson said. This is what he said in 1924. David Stevenson said, "God help the man who issues a proclamation of war against the Klan in Indianapolis. Now we are going to Klux Indiana as she's never been Klux before. I'll appeal to the ministers in Indiana to do the praying for the Ku Klux Klan, and I'll do the scrapping for it. And the fiery cross is going to burn at every crossroads in Indiana as long as there's a white man left in the state." There he is, David Curtis Stevenson. He said that in 1924. Now, what Stevenson wanted to do was build a separate school system, a segregated school system in Indiana. There was not one there. So he got the school board to go along with his wishes. The black community did not want a segregated school, but one was built. What they wanted to do was name that school, the board did, after Thomas Jefferson. The black community complained, and they made a concession to the black community. They did not name it after Thomas Jefferson because he was a person that was a slave owner. He had enslaved hundreds of black men, women, and children. Instead, they wanted their school to be named after Crispus Attucks. Let me show you who Crispus Attucks was. Of course, he was a patriot during the American Revolution. This was a picture, a sketch from March 5th, 1770. Now, in 1768, the British had redcoats all around Boston. They had a lot of taxation, and they were patrolling the area. And a group of patriots got together to fight or to contest the redcoats. Crispus Attucks was the leader of that group. He had a club with him, and they went to have a confrontation with the redcoats. Crispus Attucks was the first person shot and killed, and that was the start, many say, of the American Revolution. So he died for America. And what they wanted to see was his story continue in textbooks, in stories, in memorials. There's a landmark for him now in the Boston Commons that the black community demanded at that time, and they had one built. And his was the first name of the 5 people that were killed in the Boston Massacre, March 5th, 1770. So they had their school named Crispus Attucks High School. What a wonderful school it was. Now, they had a guy named Russell Lane was the principal, made the principal in 1930. It was opened in 1927, and the Klan marched outside of the opening of Crispus Attucks High. They had what they wanted, segregated schools in Indianapolis. Now, in 1930, when Russell Lane came in as the principal, Russell Lane had a law degree from Dayton University. He had a PhD in education from Indiana University, and he got all his teachers to have at least a master's degree, and many had a doctorate degree. He had a very educated teaching staff, one of the best in the entire state. They ensured that the students had academic excellence, cultural pride. They knew their history. Oscar Robertson said it was like having black studies. Even in the 1940s and 50s, they read W.E.B. Du Bois and Ralph Ellison and also Richard Wright for literature. They studied black history, had a forum there. They had pride in who they were and had dignity in who they were, the students at that school. Now, they would play basketball. They had academic and athletic excellence. Matter of fact, they didn't even have a paved court near the home of of our star of the story, Oscar Robertson. They did not have a paved court. It was a dust court. They called it the Dust Bowl. So they would go to the Dust Bowl, and they would play ball from sun up to sundown. Oscar had a ball, the second-hand ball that his mom had brought, and he took care of that ball and washed it, and he played every day, got his game perfected. Now, we go forward to 1954-55 season. Oscar Robertson is a junior at Crispus Attucks High School. The school is having a lot of success, and he's one of the best players on that team and really in that state. A lot of that was due to also the coach named Ray Crow. He had hired, Russell Lane had hired Ray Crow as the coach. Ray Crow had come from a very athletic family. His younger brother, George Crow, was the Indiana Basketball Player of the Year in 1939. Mr. Basketball in the state of Indiana. It's a basketball crazy state, Indiana is. This was the first Mr. Basketball in that state and in the nation. It would be another decade before California would have a Mr. Basketball in that state. It's very common now, but the first one was George Crow, who was Mr. Basketball in 1939 in Indiana. He went on to play baseball professionally with the Boston Braves, the Milwaukee Braves, the Cincinnati Reds, and was an all-star with the St. Louis Cardinals, was Ray Crow's younger brother named George Crow. Now, what he did, he taught his players to play extremely hard. He said, we got to win every game we could. And he wanted them to be confrontational and aggressive. But he wanted to be like jazz music. where everybody was in sync, but you could have individual excellence. He recognized right away Oscar Robertson was superior. Even though he was 6'5" and almost 200 pounds, he had Oscar to handle the basketball, which Robertson did effectively well. He was very intelligent, led the flow of the game. At the end of the season, their record was 20-1. Everybody was celebrating. They took so much pride in their school, Crispus Attucks High. They were the Tigers. And even their cheerleaders had what they call a crazy song where they talked about the bad Tigers, and everybody was in sync and they cheered for them. And Ray Crow even talked about them in his book, a wonderful book that was written about Ray Crow. And I always wondered, what was the crazy song? What were some of the things that they said? He put some of the words from the crazy song in the back of the book about Ray Crow. And it said, like they were playing Short Ridge, and it said, oh, Short Ridge was rough. Oh, Short Ridge was tough. They could beat anybody, but they can't beat us. I thought they were talking about the fact that Crispus Attucks Gym didn't even have a big enough place for them to have home games. Crispus Attucks had no games at their home school. They had to play on the road even for home games, and they did that at the Butler Fieldhouse very often. But they would also talk about, these cheerleaders would say, oh, they scored some points right over the line, but we never did mine. They were so far behind. And everybody was cheering, and they were famous for that crazy song that the Crispus Attucks Bad Tigers had. They went on to win the state championship. That's very, very important in the state of Indiana. Basketball crazy state. Even in Market Square Arena, where the Pacers were playing in the 80s, they had a sign on the scoreboard that said, in 49 other states, it's just basketball, but this is Indiana. And indeed it was. So Crispus Attucks had about 11,000 people at all of their games this year. This is regular season games. 11,000 at a high school game. 15,000 would watch the state tournament. And they watched this team that was an all-black team win the state championship in 1955. That was the first time an all-black team had won any state integrated championship. Crispus Attucks and Oscar Robertson had done it. There was a huge celebration after the championship game. They went back to their community, and 25,000 people were there to celebrate. It was very important. The state of Indiana loved them, but they still didn't always treat them well and justly, and Oscar Robertson took note of that. But he really gained a lot from his experience at Crispus Attucks High. And let's tell you what happened the senior year. Again, they won the state championship. Nobody in Indiana state history had won back-to-back state championships. Crispus Attucks did. And they went undefeated. Nobody had done that either. So Oscar Robertson and the pride that they had was very instrumental to the country, to Indiana, to Indianapolis. And let me give you a little bit of what Oscar said about that. Now, first, after winning that state championship in 1955, it was a big deal. I mean, you got 15,000 fans, 25,000 celebrating, and it's valued tremendously. This is what was said by a black newspaper called the Indianapolis Recorder. In 1955, after the state championship, they said, persons unfamiliar with our state may believe that we are overdoing it and going down on our knees and giving praise to Almighty God that this glorious thing has come to pass. But basketball, especially the high school variety, occupies a particular lofty place in the Hoosier scheme of things. It is far more than a boys' sport. In fact, it is just about the most important thing there is. They thought it was just about as good as you can get to win the state championship. And that is exactly what Oscar Robertson had done. And in 1956, he was the best high school basketball player in America, won Mr. Basketball for the United States. He was recruited by everyone. Everyone wanted Oscar Robertson to play for them in college. And just so you can see a little bit, wrapping up his high school career, the name of this book about him is But They Can't Beat Us. At first, I thought that was because they didn't have a competitive gym that they could use, but it was really from that crazy song, you know, that they can do this, but they can't beat us. And that's what this book is about. It's a very good book about Oscar Robertson and his high school. And how about this right here? Attucks, a wonderful story about a great author. And just look at the smile on the faces of those athletes that had played so well, lost one game, and Ray Crow had done such a great job. As a coach, his record for his whole term, 179 wins, 20 losses. Was never coach of the year, but he had won 3 state championships while he was there. An undefeated season. Had really broken all kind of records at Attucks High. And they did a good job of recognizing that. And even the Indiana Magazine of History did a good job of chronicling the tremendous impact that Crispus Attucks team had on their city. Everybody was really proud of the way they played too. It was full court pressure. It was behind the back passes. It was excellence as only Oscar Robertson could provide. And Oscar found that that school had given him a lot of things that he could use for success. This kind of sums up some of the lessons that Oscar learned and shared. The first one was Oscar Robertson learned that inner dignity should never be compromised. He has carried that throughout his life, and it's a lesson for many of us to follow. He said, I was driven, moved by something more powerful than I am. And that is also a thing that we heard Dr. King say. He was called to do things, and he did not deny that call. He followed it. I think Oscar Robertson, this is what made him the perfect player in the NBA, in society as well as on the court. Another quote he said, being black meant you had to be better than someone else just to get by. I think many black Americans were aware of that then when he said it, and now. And lastly, he said about basketball being Indiana being the craziest state in the nation when it comes to basketball. And I have to agree with that. And I tell you, someone else that later kind of agreed with that sentiment was a guy, Lerone Bennett, a great writer. He was the Ebony magazine for over 50 years. He has many great books. And I like this book. It's a wonderful book. It's called The Challenge of Blackness. And this is kind of what Oscar was saying his experience prepared him for at Crispus Attucks High. He had a challenge being black, a way that he had to carry himself with that dignity and that pride and that knowledge of history, and to be driven by something that's more powerful than he is as an individual. All that is a part of what Lerone Bennett talked about, The Challenge of Blackness, a great book to also read by him. Now, when he got ready to go to college, he did a tremendous job in college. Oscar Robertson went to Cincinnati. He was the first black person to play for Cincinnati. He scored great as a freshman, could not play on the varsity team. That was the rules. And then when he got to be a sophomore, Oscar averaged 35 points per game. He went on from there to be the college player of the year and the leading scorer. He did that again his junior year and his senior year. He was 3-time college basketball player of the year. He got noted in many publications and newspapers, like this was the first one that I mentioned. He was in Newsweek in January 19th. Newsweek talked about how to stop the Big O. That was when Oscar was only a junior. This basketball player was in Newsweek already his junior year. How about in Look magazine? He also was in Look, where you have the Pope on the front and a nice long article on Oscar Robertson. Again, Oscar Robertson rated the equal of any all-around player in college history. They were saying Oscar was as good as anybody in the history of basketball. Also, He got written up in the Post. Nice long article on him too. These were some of the most popular magazines in the country, and they all were doing specials on Oscar Robertson. He also was in Life. Everywhere you looked, he was the most publicized player in Cincinnati. They call him the Big O. All of this while Oscar was still in college. And you know, when he was going to Cincinnati to try out, or to just show them what he could do, to play around being recruited, Jack Twyman, who was the leading scorer for the Rochester Royals, was working out with him. Twyman played for Rochester, their leading scorer and all-star. He said after they worked out, he told the recruiter, Oscar Robertson is the best basketball player I have ever seen. Oscar continued to live up to those high standards. And a little later, he was drafted by the Cincinnati Royals. That's Twyman. And as a rookie, Oscar Robertson got more publicity. As you can see, while a rookie in the NBA, he was on the cover of Time magazine. There have not been many athletes to be on the cover of Time, especially African-American athletes. The first one was, of course, the great Joe Louis in 1941. And a little later, you had Jackie Robinson, who had integrated baseball, was on the cover of Time. And right after that, you had the great tennis player, Althea Gibson, who also was on the cover of Time magazine. And right after that was Oscar Robertson. Oscar went on to have a storied career, particularly his rookie year. Let me just mention this. This is one of the major emphasis of this discussion we're having. His rookie year, Oscar Robertson averaged 30 points a game. He made the All-Star team as a rookie. He started. He was the MVP of the All-Star game his rookie year. He played for the Olympic team. He was the leading scorer. This was considered the dream team, great Olympic team. Jerry West, Walt Bellamy, Oscar Robertson, MVP. The leading scorer for that Olympic team was Oscar Robertson. The MVP of that All-Star game was Oscar Robertson. He did some amazing things his rookie year, averaging 30 points a game. He set a standard that only Oscar Robertson could live up to the rest of his career. Let's look for a moment at how Oscar Robertson's career went. So we're celebrating the 60th anniversary now of that All-Star game that he had in the 60-61 season and was the MVP. Now overall, in 56, I mentioned he was Mr. Basketball. In 57 through 60, 3 times Oscar Robertson was the NCAA scoring leader. 3 times he was first team All-American. 3 times he was a college player of the year. And then I mentioned the Olympic gold medal leading scorer, rookie of the year in the NBA, and he was also first team All-NBA as a rookie. And you know what happened after that? He continued. He averaged 30 points a game that rookie year, 10 rebounds, and 9.7 assists. He was a big guard, 6'5", 200 pounds. And for the 5 years, his first 5 years, he averaged 30 points, 10.4 rebounds, 10.6 assists. He averaged a triple-double, and they didn't even count them as triple-doubles. Oscar was just doing what Oscar does. He was, in 64, he was MVP of the NBA. Now, in that decade of the 50s to the 60s, it was either Oscar or Bill, and they got MVP every year. 1 year, Oscar Robertson was MVP. So he was doing tremendous things. He was a 9-time first team NBA. He was 2 times second team, 11 overall, and 12 times he was an NBA All-Star. When Robertson retired, he was the all-time leader in assists in the NBA and second in scoring only to Wilt Chamberlain. 1 year in 1968, he led the league in scoring, assists, and free throw percentage. Only tiny Nate Archibald had done likewise. So we see the tremendous career that he had had, the impact that he had had. And last thing I have to mention, he was the head of the NBA Players Association for 11 years. He fought against the reserve clause and won. In 1976, they made a concession that players could be free agents. They could go to a new team once their contract was up. The old team didn't reserve rights to them. So he fought for that and won. He fought for medical coverage. He fought for the players union, for the retired players union. Oscar Robertson was a pioneer in American sports and culture. He was a player we really should be proud of. And I think my dad was right. He was the best player and the one perfect player in NBA history. They've asked that question many times, and my answer has always been the same. There's been only one perfect player in the history of the NBA. That's Oscar Robertson, and today we honor him. Thank you.